Misha White, let me get the title exactly right. Western Australia, Colliers, a large property organisation. Misha is Manager of Research and Urban Economics for Colliers International. She's going to give us an update on property, but particularly focused on Perth. Okay. Where are we on the property market? Hopefully I've got that right.
Yes.
Done. Thank you.
So hi everyone, thanks very much for having me. Thank you very much. It's going to be a hard act to follow here, but I'm actually going to go, am I a bit loud? I feel like it. So I'm actually going to go through a little bit of what's happening in the WA economy at the moment for us, and then go a little bit more into the property dynamics after that. So I'm sure everyone wants to know what's happening with WA and Perth and where are we, because we've been suffering for quite a long period of time. So in terms of really thinking where are we now, I suppose everyone's wondering, well, where are we? Are we still declining? Are we at the bottom? And this isn't going to, not going to go in there. So I suppose at the moment we see that the property market, and there's been a lot of talk really about it, that we're somewhere near the bottom. We're somewhere near 6 o'clock. We might be moving a little bit past 6 o'clock, but it's quite patchy at the moment. So we seem to be bouncing around. We hadn't sort of come to any generalised movement sort of upwards, but there's some green shoots, then they seem to die, then they seem to come back again. So we're really waiting for that to develop more into a bit of a lawn rather than what we have at the moment. So we've got some good signs and some bad signs. But overall, I think things are getting better. So just before we started to go through into talking about the property market, I wanted to have a little bit of an explanation about some of the key drivers for the residential property market. And this follows on a lot about what Nathan was talking about. So really it's about the economy is doing well, that it's generating employment, that people are getting, wages are increasing, that are getting paid well, therefore they can obviously pay their mortgages and cope with interest rate rises, and they're consuming. And then obviously from that you tend to, particularly in WA, you tend to attract more population, and with population growth then obviously you have more demand for the property market. So the other parts, sort of short-term pieces of the puzzle, are also the level of supply, and then obviously confidence, which is a big one, I think we're suffering from particularly, and interest rates. So really, when you've got a high supply, that really means that there's a lot more choices, and there's a lot lower levels of urgency, which is what we've seen, and that tends to put a bit more downward pressure on price at the moment. Whereas obviously when you've got low supply, everyone's a bit more crazy, they've got a fear of missing out, and that tends to drive the prices up a bit. So that's what we had previously, but obviously now we're in quite a lull. So I just wanted to basically talk about those drivers, and then as I go through, we're basically going to follow on an explanation of how WA is doing in that. So obviously we were talking about investment and investment in WA. And so really what we've been seeing is we had this sort of high, obviously you can see there, hopefully you can see the graph. We've had this huge boom effectively, which we've been talking about, the mining boom, and then really we've found that that's dropped off, investments dropped off. And so really there's been this huge drag on the economy as that investment spend has become lower and lower. And if we look at that in comparison to the other states, you can really see how large it is. So it was kind of like the red and the yellow are Queensland, the high booms, and the other states. So really we've had sort of like a 1 in a 100-year event. And as Nathan was saying, we're really not going to be expecting that to come back again in that same sort of format. So going forward, it's more likely we're going to be strong and steady rather than leaping back to what we've previously seen. So we're not going to be going back into that same sort of boom territory we don't see at this point in time. So really, why did it happen previously? So why did we have this mining downturn? So really, in actual fact, it was sort of really always going to happen. It's just that nobody really paid much attention, or most of the general populace didn't pay much attention to that, and we thought it was just going to carry on forever. So a lot of the mining went from sort of this investment phase from the mining boom into an export phase. So when you've got this investment phase, you've got a lot of construction going on, you need a lot of employees, and then you move into an operational phase. And obviously then you're having it's much less labour intensive and much less spend. So this sort of increase in the mining output was never really going to substitute the investment that had been put in previously. And then add to that into the mix as well, then we sort of had this, the world resource prices decreased, those lower mining resources, revenues for government also meant that we had decreased spending capacity as well. So how do we think WA is going right now? More graphs for you, but this is basically a graph which is talking about our state final demand. And state final demand really effectively looks at consumption, so level of spending. And it's regardless of where the origins of the goods and services are. And the majority of that is through households. So really, if you look back to sort of when the 2012, around when the mining boom started to downturn, really since then we've been on this decline, we've been having negative growth since then, and really at this stage, for the last sort of 3 quarters annually, we've been positive, which is for us is quite it's quite a green shoot that we would think of, because prior to that we'd really had a lot of negative growth, and we've really started to turn around. So what's happened is a lot of people haven't been spending, they've been worried about their mortgages, and basically they're not feeling very confident, so they basically have their hands in their pockets for an extended period of time, and that's what's been influencing our economy. But we're now starting to see that starting to pick up. Just to give you an idea about how this fits into the rest of the economy, and how you could see this over time. Just a minute. Basically, this gives you a long-term view, and really this is one of the lowest points that we've been at in comparison to all the other economic events that we've had over time. So really this has been quite significant for WA, and we're now starting to see that we're starting to come out of that. Like we said, we're not going to rebound robustly, but we are at least coming to a better stage. Do you want to pass some water? Sorry. So when we're looking at that, we talked before about the effect that obviously the economy then has on employment. And obviously a lot of you might know anecdotally people who've lost their jobs, they've gone part-time or they've become contractors. And we're really starting to see that that's been a bit of a turnaround now. We're starting to see employment picking up again slightly for WA, and that hasn't for some extended period of time. So we're seeing that as quite a positive. We've also seen this change from going from full-time employment, a lot of more full-time employment, transitioning to more part-time employment when the mining downturn was on, because they didn't want to have as much risk, and that started to turn around again, showing there's more confidence going forward. So this is just a look at the through the SEEK, their job ads going forward, and at the moment we've got WA seeing a 23% increase in their job ads, which is quite significant for WA from where we were previously. And so we look at New South Wales, it's only around 13%. So we're starting to have more jobs coming into the space, although we haven't actually seen all that flow through into some of the stats yet, but we presume that we will. Overall, this, looking at the whole of Australia, where the job growth has been, or the ad growth has actually been in mining, resources and energy, and a lot of that's coming from the WA market. And just as I was talking before, I always like to point to my slides, my pointer's not working as well, but this is where you're talking about proportion of contractors to permanent jobs. So when the mining downturn was on, they had this change from full-time to contractors. So they were trying to spread out their risk. Now, as they're feeling that that's starting to turn around, we're starting to find that there's more permanent jobs coming on, and a lot of you might again know that anecdotally. Most of you will know people in the mining industry or the resources industry, and you're starting to see a lot more of those people being offered full-time roles. So these are all more green shoots. So in terms of population growth, again, very slowly, but our population has started to turn around. It's been under 1% for quite a period of time. It still is at this point in time, but we're starting to see that the interstate migration that we were having, so there were more people leaving the state than were staying, that started to turn around, and we're starting to see more overseas migration coming back in. So that'll help with the health of the economy and also the demand for residential. So again, we're starting to see that that's flowing through to wages and household income. Again, it's quite slow. WA is the blue line, and that's still well underneath Australia, the national average, but it is starting to pick up. If we talk about it, really, WA still has some of the highest wages in the state anyway, in comparison, in the nation, in comparison to a lot of the other states. So we're still doing quite well comparatively, but our growth is a lot slower than it has been in the other states. But seeing as we've been so high, we can probably afford to lose a little bit, although I'm not sure everyone here would agree with me. And one of the other things that we've seen really is that confidence has started to rebound. And this is really important, particularly in terms of property. So if people are feeling like the market is starting to rebound, as Nathan was saying before, it's sort of like a self-perpetuating beast. So if you're starting to feel like you can buy a property or feeling confident about it, then you're more likely to drive the market as well. But as we coming back to consumption, basically not a lot has been happening in the marketplace, and also we've had that reduction in population as well. But in terms of consumer confidence, it's about the highest it's been for the last 4 years, and business confidence rebounded as well. We've still got interest rates at record lows, obviously. You've got a lot of difference now in terms of investment loans, so that's making a difference, and that does seem to be having a difference in terms of property purchases. Where we used to have a lot of investors in the market, they've really just left the market. It's decimated the market, particularly at the moment, in terms of the differential interest rates and some of the credit controls that have been introduced lately, particularly around the interest-only loans. So as far as that's concerned, we're still likely to see that majority of the activities in owner-occupiers, and the investors are still staying out of the market as much at this stage, which is more to do with their circumstances. So just taking all of that information, then trying to apply it into the residential market for you, so you get an understanding of how that's affecting the residential market. So in terms of I really like this graph, but you might not all be able to see this. This is basically, over an extended period of time, it's about the volumes of transactions, and it's also including the median house price, which is the lines. So the house price is the lines, the horizontal lines, and the vertical lines are actually the transactions. So what you can see on the right-hand side, and which everyone will be feeling, is that we've still got some of the most historic lows that we've had in terms of transactions for the Perth property market. So at this point, we're still at very low ebb. What's interesting though, the red dotted line is the when we had the mining downturn, and what you can see has happened after that is that we were still having, people were still transacting, they were still going along with buying property. Property prices didn't come down at all, the median price was still rising, and a lot of that was to do with basically people not understanding what was happening, but also they were still just following the property market blindly, not looking at the underlying drivers for that. Really in terms of the median house price, given where we came from originally, there was this huge rise in the median house price from the mid-1990s through to the early 2000s. But you can see that although we have lost some value in house prices, it has remained relatively stable. And one of the reasons for that is that people generally don't like to sell their house for less than what they think it's worth, unless they're forced to. So, and we've had this sort of interest rate period, and a lot of people have having to try and sort of get out while they could because of their financial situation. But a lot of people just saying, well, if I don't get my price, I'm not going to sell. So this is what are some of the reasons why we have had this relatively stable median. But that may change as the interest rate, if interest rates change at all. What we have found also on the back of that, and the red line will stay on quite a few slides, it's the start of the mining downturn to give you some perspective. is really the supply pipeline has slowed dramatically at this period of time, but directly after the mining downturn, we were still wanting to, that's approvals, and then we've got commencements. So we were still planning and building a lot of housing. So we were still going along this line, already on it. We couldn't stop it, so we're continuing, and there was a lot of talk about the apartment oversupply, that there's too much out there. But what's happened is that markets self-regulate, so as soon as there wasn't as much demand, as you can see, that's really turned down, and now we're finding that the market has started to come down. Again, like any market, it's cyclical, so probably what will happen is we'll end up with a lack of supply, and as soon as the market picks up, then we'll start to find some of that pressure that will come through into the demand. So one of the key things to look out for in terms of the property market is the vacancy rate. So the vacancy rate is really a key indicator of what's happening. So the higher the vacancy rate, it means that there's basically more choices for people, and that dwellings become more affordable, obviously, because the rent drops. So what we've happened is, obviously, again, you can see where the mining downturn came in. We then had vacancy go through the roof. We started to have, obviously, a lot of people who were employed and working here started to leave and go back to the eastern states or other places that they had alternative work. And so we started to see that pressure into the rental market, and we started to see, if any of you are investors, you might have already felt a bit of that. So the rent started to drop down. It was difficult to get tenants. And it's just recently, we've probably happened sort of through 2017, we've started to see that vacancy rate has started to tighten somewhat. So there's starting to become a little bit more pressure in the rental market, although that hasn't flowed through directly into rents. The rents have been staying relatively stable at the moment. So what we've seen is rents are now starting to stabilise. So for the last couple of quarters, the median rent's been about $350, and that hasn't changed for a little while. So we're seeing that, again, we're at that kind of bouncy stage, but it's likely that that will stay relatively stable. And as vacancy continues to go down, then we'll find that that will slowly start to creep up. Again, that will depend on the location. That won't necessarily be across the board. The more desirable suburbs, obviously, the rent will start to increase in those places first, along with sales. And then that will sort of flow out into some of the other areas. This is just looking at the year-on-year change in terms of the for sale listings. So we look at this in terms of a weekly. Every week they have a number of listings that REWA put out, so the number of listings that there are, and then we compare that back to the previous year to see how the change is. And what we've been seeing sort of for quite an extended period of time, since about 2013, basically we've been seeing that listing change is increasing. So year on year, per each week, the listings were growing and growing and growing, which would mean there was more choice, which is putting more pressure on the price to send that downwards. What we've started seeing, obviously, since 2016 is we've started to see this, that it's started to become negative. So we're starting to see the listings have actually started to drop now, and that's a positive sign. So we're seeing less listings week on week, although we still have a large number of listings. So less people are putting their properties into the marketplace, so there's less supply. And we're also seeing that in rental listings. So we've seen that obviously, they were growing over a period of time. We're now seeing that that's starting to fall away as well. So both of those are positives. So just in terms of this, so what we're seeing is that basically in terms of right at the end here, you'll see that the listing stock for sales, which is in the blue, has started to rise slightly, and the rental listings have started to fall slightly. So there's some feeling that it might be that actually those people who previously couldn't sell their properties were renting them out, and now they're starting to feel that perhaps there's been a lot of press in the market that it might be a little bit better, things are going a bit better now, that they've actually been swapping them out and putting them into the for sales transactions. So they're actually coming onto the market more. And that may be where we've seen that sort of bumping around in terms of the median price. It's been about was about 510, then it went up to 520 in December, and then it's come back to 510 again in the latest quarter. So we're seeing this sort of bumping around at the moment, but we'll start to see that will start to trade up a little bit. Obviously, we started to have population growth increasing as well, so that'll start to help drive a little bit more demand as well. So one of the things that we were talking about before, which is quite interesting, is just this relationship between the listing stock. So the more stock that you have on the market, and the other line is the average selling days. So the more stock that you have on the market, then the longer it takes to sell. And you can see this correlation quite easily as well. So if there's a lot of stock in the market, don't put your property on to sell. Leave it off for a time, watch the market and watch when there isn't as much there, and then you want to find there's a little bit more pressure in there for yourself. So on to my last slide. So we were just talking about how is everything going. On the very far left-hand side, or right-hand side for me, left-hand side, that far side, you can see that's the median house price. And you can see that obviously the orange and the red is all your western blue chip suburbs. And then we're seeing where is it actually starting to grow. So we've started to see sort of some patchy results locally in terms of some individual suburbs, and that's how it will be. Not the whole market will pick up all at once. And what we've started to see, it's probably not very easy to see, but in 2018 through to February through to June, you started to see some changes in the colours. So obviously around the river, along the ocean, that sort of western suburb strip, you're starting to see that growth is starting to improve a bit there. So that's starting to improve more. You started to see the median house price push up in those desirable areas. And what you will find is from the February to June, you started to see that started to filter out a little bit. And so we're likely to see that on a continuing basis, that will start to grow. Those areas will grow first, and then the growth will come out and the demand will fill out into those other areas in terms of the median price picking up. So overall, basically, it's not fabulous news, but I'd definitely say that we're passing the 6 o'clock and we're more likely to start to see things pick up over this next year and the coming year. Thank you.